Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Xi Jinping has had his first meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin on the first day of his 3-day state visit to Russia. And of course, the world is watching. We will likely see a slow dripping of details, announcements and analyses in the coming days, which we will in turn unpack. For day one, let's start with the Russo-Chinese statements and positions, then move to the Western reactions. The two leaders put on a united front after meeting in the Kremlin on yesterday, calling each other dear friend. Putin welcomed, rhetorically at least, Beijing's offer to mediate with Ukraine. In the official readout, Putin expressed to Xi, quote, "You personally and all our Chinese friends devote much attention to Russian-Chinese relations, taking a fair and balanced stance on the majority of topical international issues. We have carefully studied your proposals on resolving the acute Ukraine crisis and will have an opportunity to discuss this matter. We know that you are guided by the principles of justice." End quote. An article signed by Putin was published in Chinese state media the same day. We observe the same articulation we have seen form over the past 12 months in Russo-Chinese communications. The idea of a just and democratic Russo-Chinese alliance standing firm against a declining West clinging to its fading hegemonic power. Quote, "We can feel the geopolitical landscape in the outside world change dramatically, sticking more stubbornly than ever to its obsolete dogmata and vanishing dominance. The collective West is gambling on the fates of entire states and peoples. The crisis in Ukraine, which was provoked and is being fueled by the West, is the most striking, yet not the only manifestation of its desire to retain its international dominance and preserve the unipolar world order." End quote. For his part, Xi Jinping expressed, quote, "China will work with Russia to uphold true multilateralism, promote a multipolar world and greater democracy in international relations, and help make global governance more just and equitable." End quote. In a separate article penned by Xi, or at the very least signed by him, published in Russian state media, the Chinese General Secretary expressed, quote, "Since last year there has been an all-round escalation of the Ukraine crisis. China has all along upheld an objective and impartial position based on the merits of the issue and actively promoted peace talks. I have put forth several proposals, i.e. observing the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, respect of the legitimate security concerns of all countries, supporting all efforts conducive to the peaceful settlement of the crisis, and ensuring the stability of global industrial and supply chains. They have become China's fundamental principles for addressing the Ukraine crisis." End quote. Now, these are a lot of pretty words and very stately language between the two sides, and while it does appear that there is a genuine friendliness between Xi and Putin, perhaps even friendship, though to what degree it's hard to know, at the end of the day, Russo-Chinese interactions are driven primarily by deep geopolitical considerations as understood by the two leaders. China has provided an economic lifeline to Russia that has helped ease the blow from Western sanctions. Trade between the two nations have jumped over the last 12 months, and energy-poor China has imported large amounts of natural gas and oil from a market-poor Russia. In January and February of this year, Russia became China's top supplier of oil, shipping about 15.68 million tons of crude oil. It's unclear whether a deal on the third gas pipeline between the two countries, known as Power of Siberia 2, will be on the agenda of this trip, however. As we discussed yesterday, politically, both sides are seeking mutual international legitimacy. Putin, legitimacy for the war in Ukraine. Xi, legitimacy for his foreign policy goals and initiatives. And then, argue some analysts, there are the geostrategic moves. Quote, "There will be a new era of confrontation, a long-lasting Cold War between different camps. The fragmentation and disruption will hamper not just China, Russia and Iran, but also the United States and Europe. The world will be less comfortable for trade, for education, for any kind of negotiations, for the next 20 to 25 years. End quote. Chinese policymakers understand that Beijing is currently enjoying high levels of leverage over Russia and will exploit this position in deal-making. Analysts are now debating too just how dependent Russia is becoming on Beijing and what the implications of such dependence could mean for the future. Quote, several years from now, the West will have eliminated its economic dependency on anything Russian. Russia's economy will adjust, with enormous Chinese help, to a new model, poorer and technologically backward, but sustainable. China will consume the bulk of Russian exports and provide its only modern technology. The Russian financial system will be fully yuanized. The sanctioned leaders of the Russian security services and the military will become the country's new elite, mostly veterans of the Ukrainian campaign, with no experience of traveling to the West since 2014, and many with children in top Chinese universities. It will be a tall order to restore ties with the West and crawl out from under this Chinese dominance, and next to impossible for the team that will probably run the Kremlin after Mr. Putin finally leaves. Vassalage to China will look more familiar, predictable, and beneficial. End quote. The White House has said that China's peace plan amounts to, quote, the ratification of Russian conquest, end quote, by calling for a ceasefire that would, quote, codify Russian occupation of Ukrainian territory and give Moscow time to replenish its depleted forces, end quote. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken expressed on Monday that, quote, the fundamental element of any plan for ending the war in Ukraine and producing a just and durable peace must be upholding the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, end quote. Ukraine has so far avoided criticizing China's plan ahead of an expected call between Xi and Zelensky, which would mark the first time they have spoken since the war began. Some analysts appear deeply cynical about the meeting, viewing it as simply political theatre. Quote, it's a cover for deepening ties with Russia and pushing back against Western criticism against China. The optics of the trip are terrible in the West, so the peace plan gives Xi an excuse to be travelling to Moscow. End quote. We will continue to follow developments of this state visit to Russia in the following days. Next up, the Chinese economy. Hey guys, as always, if you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that like button. It's a huge help. If you've not subscribed, maybe consider subscribing and perhaps even checking to see if you're still subscribed. And anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep the channel sustainable, allow me to keep making these episodes for you guys every day, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. The channel is fully supported by the community of subscribers. I thank them and everybody for the ongoing support. Okay, let's move through economic developments. According to new official customs data, China recorded its biggest gain in imports in a year in February. Imports rose 4.2% year-on-year to almost $200 billion in February, following a plunge of 21.4% in January, and ending 4 months of decline. Exports were down 1.3% year-on-year in February to $214 billion. Not good, but better than the 10.5% drop we saw in January. The performance is yet another sign that the Chinese economy is crawling out of its zero-COVID era, with demand coming back. Beijing is hoping for consumer spending to help counter the impacts of several drags on growth, from falling exports to an ongoing property crisis. Analysts agree that this year should see a rebound in demand, largely driven by the release of pent-up demand after 3 years of zero COVID, but continue to debate just how big it will be and whether it will be enough. Next up for the economy, our old friend, China Evergrande Group, is back in the news. The world's most indebted developer expressed during a court hearing yesterday that a restructuring plan is finally ready and will be released by the end of the month. The preliminary proposal includes a debt-to-equity swap option, music to the ears of some creditors. Bloomberg's Hong Kong team writes today that an agreement would be a milestone in the saga of Evergrande. Quote, the poster child of woes in China's real estate industry, whose tumble into distress over the past 2 years set off contagion in the nation's $150 billion junk dollar bond market, End quote. Indications of how much creditors can recover, it writes, will serve as important reference points for the debt restructurings of other defaulted developers. Evergrande is facing a lawsuit in Hong Kong from an investor seeking liquidation of the company for an alleged financial obligation valued at $110 million. This is a huge wild card, as a court-ordered liquidation would mean the debt restructuring process would fall apart. This would be a big deal and likely deeply destabilizing, as Evergrande has nearly 2 trillion yuan, $290 billion in liabilities. And finally, for today's episode, up-and-coming Chinese electric vehicle company XPeng Inc., XPENG Inc., has expressed in a new earnings report that it expects revenue and vehicle deliveries to nosedive in Q1. The report frankly informs investors that the would-be Tesla Challenger's revenue will likely plunge 43.7% to 63.3% year-on-year to approximately 4 billion yuan. $581 million in the first quarter of 2023. The company predicts that deliveries will plunge almost 50%. This was in contrast with XPeng's 2022 performance, which saw 28% growth in revenue, and very much in contrast with 2021 and 2020, when its deliveries skyrocketed 263% and over 112%, respectively, causing market excitement for the EV company. So what's going on? Well, XPeng is not alone. Its poor outlook is likely shared by many others in the sector, which are all facing a two-sided squeeze. On the one side, government subsidies on EVs, which had previously supported high levels of consumer demand, are being removed. Many of the EV companies set up during the high of this subsidized support era are now feeling the hangover and competing with a crowded industry for a share in a now slower growing market. This touches on the second factor hitting the industry. Automakers in China, for both new energy vehicles and conventionally powered cars, are currently engaging in an ongoing price war to win a shrinking market share. And currently it is very cutthroat. Auto sales volumes shrank 19.8% in the first 2 months of this year. The price war is thus slashing the profitability of car manufacturers, while also causing consumers to hold off buying in anticipation of cuts. In the long run, this will likely be good for the sector, as weaker players are washed out of the market. But for the short to medium term, it's a bloodbath. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a wonderful day wherever you are, and I will see you all tomorrow.